long time ago, in a country far, far away, there was a company called Wargaming.net. They made a game called World of Tanks. And one day they decided they were going to put in 4 premium vehicles. Unfortunately, shit happened, and those 4 premium vehicles never saw the light of day. Well, I say never, they did. And one of them has recently come to see the light of day much more clearly. Well, sort of. Soon enough, it will do. Today, we are looking at an incredibly rare tank that will not be rare anymore. This is the first iteration, I believe the first iteration, of patch 9.0. I do apologise for the funny little chevrons you see there. That's from Jimbo's crosshair mod, the gun constraints. Yes, I do like how this patch looks. And today, we're looking at this little beauty. This, ladies and gentlemen, is due to become a premium tank. It technically was meant to be a premium tank the instant it was released, well, introduced into the game. It is the Su-85I, the Tier 5 Russian tank destroyer. Its regular researchable cousin is right over there. That is Killer Chicken in his Su-85. And there's my brother in his T-49, blah blah blah. Unless, yeah, there's probably not a lot of people who haven't heard of this tank. I mean, look at it. This is a captured Panzer III, and the Russians turned the thing into a bloody tank destroyer. Only reason these didn't take off the ground or anything, not just because they didn't have wings, but well, because there was a lack of spare parts. Panzer IIIs stopped being an effective fighting vehicle sometime in the middle of 1942, and 1943 maybe, I can't remember. But basically, by the beginning of 1944, they were practically obsolete. And, well, the Russians weren't going to find very many on the battlefield until the Su-85I and its the Su-76I cousin never got off the ground. So, this is mine, actually. I've bought it. Yes, I finally bought one. And I bought Killer one as well. And let's just talk a little bit about this tank, because you're going to be seeing this vehicle soon enough. I think it's about time you start learning where to shoot it, what it does. So, Su-85I. It has a 85mm D5S 85A cannon with 119mm of penetration and 160 damage on its standard armor-piercing ammunition. With armor-piercing composite rigid, the premium ammo, it has 161 penetration and 160 damage. And the high explosive has 43 pen, 280 damage. Its maximum armor is 60mm on the front. And you're going to be quite surprised, since it is very similar to a Stug. Of course, the Stug is based on the Panzer III as well, and the two vehicles are on the same tier. But this tank is in some respects better than an upgraded Stug. It does 48 degrees per second. You know, traverse time. That is insane. It goes at 50 kilometers per hour. Compared to the Stug's 40, it is pretty damn quick. This also has an advantage in hit points over the Stug, 380 instead of 350. However, horsepower is somewhat less, 300 horsepower engine as opposed to the Stug's 440. So, of course, power to weight ratio isn't as good, but hey, it still goes faster, even in reverse, but not as much. 48 degrees per second reverse as opposed to 44. Terrain resistance is generally better as well. These are some of the soft stats that you don't see in the game. I've learnt that the smaller the number, the better the resistance. So hard terrain resistance, medium terrain, soft terrain. And it goes 1.1 to 1.1, 1.1 to 1.4, 2.1 to 2.3. So basically, it's a little bit faster on these terrains than the Stug is, and all that. Hull armor is not as good, of course. 60 on the front as opposed to the Stug's 80. Side armor is 30. Rear hull armor for the Su-85I is 50 as opposed to the Stug's 30, so there's that. However, this is a sort of improvised tank destroyer. So it doesn't have as good a gun arc, only 20 degrees, 10 degrees in each direction, as opposed to the Stug's 15 degrees in each direction. Whilst this has slightly better gun elevation, its depression isn't as good. Minus 5 degrees as opposed to minus 7. And then we have the gun. Because it's it's an 85mm and it's Russian. It has better damage, of course, as opposed to the long L70 on the Stug, but it is not as... It can theoretically produce the same, much more of damage per minute than the L70, but it has less penetration, it's far less accurate. Oh dear. However, it reloads at the same speed, so there's that. And it holds much more ammunition, 58 rounds as opposed to 36. The view range is better, the signal range is better, it's cheaper to repair. So, Su-85I, I believe this is going to be a pretty good investment. Where to shoot it, however, that's a different story. If I had Tank Inspector, I'd use that. Well, I do have Tank Inspector, but unfortunately you need an internet connection to make it work, and unfortunately I don't have an internet connection. Anyway, as you can see, pretty obvious weak spot is the cupola, right there on top of the tank. That's a huge, bloated blister of a weak spot. Oh, it's going to be hard to miss that. It has approximately about 30mm of armor, so there's not a lot that can't penetrate it. The thickest armor on the vehicle is pretty much where the driver's hatch is. Of course, around the gun, there's a sort of armoured collar, a ring of armour, round about here, all around the gun. Of course, the mantlet's going to be pretty tough. And this area around here is also pretty thick. It's not the... I think that's in fact... Yep, that's the 60mm. The armoured collar is actually 65mm. Whilst the gun mantle itself is 50mm, and that counts as spaced armour. Hang on. The bit where the drivetrain, the transmission bit is, all around here, where the words are getting in the way, that is 50 millimeters. And the weakest part on the front save the cupola is the top bit of the of the casemate. That's it, casemate, and that is about that's a 45 millimeters. So this is the weakest area. The sides is of course 30, and the rear is pretty weak as well. However, that orange on here on my phone with the knowledge base, it's 50 millimeters. Of course, I remember now. But of course, if you do so happen to have less than 50 millimeters of penetration on your gun, then don't shoot here where the 50 millimeters is. Shoot here. That area is only 15 to 25 millimeters. It's pretty weak. And the tracks themselves also count as 10 millimeters of space armor. So it's going to be a pretty deadly vehicle, but it's also very fragile. There's not a lot out there that can't kill this thing. A KV-1S, like those things, those babies can one-shot this, much like they can pretty much every other Tier 5 tank destroyer. So, this is the only game I've had in it so far. Let's show you just a little bit of how it went. It's not a very good game. It's all I've got though. So, I'll leave you to make your own judgments of it. Have a good one, folks. Good night.
Just remember the moves, Shinji. Full power, maximum performance.
Yeah, I need to get used to the tank, don't I? Oh dear. Well, I like it already. That's all I can say.